Imagine that the best, most immersive game ever created was just released. You put on your full dive virtual reality headset and you open your eyes. The graphics bring you to the edge of tears. Rolling green hills streaked by sunlight. Beautiful, rustic towns and futuristic cities. But best of all, you have freedom. You can be the strongest dragon slayer. You can join an adventurer's guild and explore sprawling dungeons with your guildmates. You can become the wealthiest merchant on the server and dominate the economy. You can hoard cheese wheels. Whatever you want to do, you can go out and do it. You can probably see where this is going, but what I just described already exists. That game I'm talking about is the game of life. A couple of years ago, when I had a lot of free time on my hands and no idea what I was doing, I would spend an absurd amount of time playing video games. I would play games like Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike or the worst game ever created, League of Legends, for 10 to 12 hours a day. Video games are like opiates to me, and I'm not really using a figure of speech here. I remember sitting in my underwear in the middle of winter, with my windows open and the heating off because I couldn't be bothered to leave my chair. I would just sit like that, gaming, for the entire day. When I got up to grab food or something, I would notice that my finger joints had limited mobility because they were literally frozen. The first time this happened, I freaked out, since I had to use my left hand to physically straighten the fingers on my right hand. My skin would also turn pale because the cold constricted my blood vessels. I was so focused during my sessions that I didn't feel any pain, so I mostly ignored all of this. During that period of my life, nothing mattered except gaming. But why did I sink so many thousands of hours into this activity? Dr. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, developed the psychotherapeutic approach of logotherapy in order to help others find meaning in life. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Dr. Frankl describes his experience in finding meaning in his own life, despite the extreme and involuntary suffering as a concentration camp prisoner and heavy personal losses. Logotherapy defines the existential vacuum as the state of inner emptiness and meaninglessness that people might experience when they believe their lives are devoid of purpose. Basic physical needs such as food, water, air, clothing, and shelter are met, yet there is a lingering sense of dissatisfaction. Some try to fill this existential vacuum through the pursuit of superficial pleasure or materialism. Others, like me, try to numb this feeling through distraction. In the postscript of Man's Search for Meaning, Dr. Frankl gives an example of how people who lack meaning act, and what happens if one's groping for a meaning has been in vain. This may well result in a fatal condition. In the concentration camps, this behavior was paralleled by those who one morning, at 5, refused to get up and go to work, and instead stayed in the hut, on the straw wet with urine and feces. Nothing, neither warnings nor threats, could induce them to change their minds. And then something typical occurred. They took out a cigarette from deep down in a pocket where they had hidden it, and started smoking. At that moment we knew that for the next 48 hours or so, we would watch them dying. Meaning orientation had subsided, and consequently the seeking of immediate pleasure had taken over. To give context to that quote, cigarettes could be exchanged for 12 soups, and 12 soups were often a very real respite from starvation. The privilege of actually smoking cigarettes was reserved for the capo, who had his assured quota of weekly cigarette coupons, or possibly for a prisoner who worked as a foreman in a warehouse or workshop and received a few cigarettes in exchange for doing dangerous jobs. Thus, when we saw a comrade smoking his own cigarettes, we knew he had given up faith in his strength to carry on, and, once lost, the will to live seldom returned. If there is a lack of meaning, then the resulting existential vacuum can lead to psychological and emotional issues, such as depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. There lies a dilemma. I need meaning in life. Where do I find this meaning when life doesn't seem to offer any inherent meaning? If life has no purpose, then the following question might be a reasonable follow-up. Then why continue living? One of the central tenets of logotherapy states, our main motivation for living is our will to find meaning in life. The concept of the will to meaning suggests that there is an innate human drive to find meaning and purpose in life, a force that is as powerful as the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Video games offer the player this sense of purpose by offering objectives and easy dopamine hits in the form of rewards. The most attractive thing about video games is that you can get a sense of progression, achievement, and fulfillment while also being able to skip most of the suffering. I'll never forget the best moments from my favorite games. 12 a.m. Counter-Strike sessions with friends when we're all laughing and screaming into our microphones, jumping into the eye of the universe in Outer Wilds, the ending scene of Metro Exodus, the big reveal in Omori, beating the Nameless King in Dark Souls 3, the first glimpse of Columbia in Bioshock Infinite. In a game, you can never die, and you can retry a difficult task as many times as you want, with little to no penalty. A few keystrokes and a couple of hours in exchange for feeling like you're progressing in something and truly having fun, well, that's a pretty good deal. But is the suffering really something you would want to skip? To me, adventure is the thrilling sensation of struggling to internalize the unknown. It is challenging myself, pushing myself to act just outside the boundaries of my ability. It is undergoing pain and repeated failures in order to achieve something I wanted to pursue. Adventure, and the responsibility it represents, is the greatest prize that the game of life has to offer. The greatest lessons and skills I have learned in life were earned as a result of suffering. I mean, I'm decently jacked only because I've spent thousands of hours ripping my muscles apart in the gym, consistently, for several years. I think suffering is an intrinsic part of the human condition. Every bite of delicious food and every minute of a pleasurable activity generates an almost painful urge for more. Every bit of chocolate eaten will release a bit of pain that tells us to take another bite. Every high has a corresponding low, and this seems to be built into our biology. Every dopamine high from the pursuit of an enjoyable event will have a corresponding and proportional drop below baseline dopamine levels. According to neuroscientist and Stanford University professor Dr. Andrew Huberman, suffering and frustration is also necessary for learning. On his podcast episode, Using Failures, Movement, and Balance to Learn Faster, at 29 minutes and 10 seconds, he says, "The signal that generates neuroplasticity is the making of errors. It's the reaches and failures that signal to the nervous system that this is not working. Errors are the basis for neuroplasticity and for learning. And humans do not like this feeling of frustration and making errors. The few that do exceedingly well in whatever pursuits they happen to be involved in. The ones that don't generally don't do well. They generally don't learn much. Video games will offer you short-term comfort at the price of long-term stagnation. The game of life will offer you short-term suffering in exchange for long-term personal development and tangible progression. People spending time in the virtual world are essentially spending their own life force to level up a player character instead of themselves. And with every save wipe, with each new game, that life force is lost forever." A question you might ask is, what about personal entertainment? Video games are fun. I would like to have fun, and time spent having fun can't be time wasted. That's a fair enough argument, and it's one I've made many times before. Well, are video games really fun? For the first few years, I suppose it was. Even an hour was enough to give me a childlike sense of wonder and enjoyment. There was the thrill of adrenaline in competitive games. That moment when you're trying to clutch and you're pushed to your absolute limit. When you stop thinking and act purely out of reflexes and instinct. When you feel truly alive and can feel your heart pounding in your chest. There's the peaceful weekend nights when you're chilling in a voice call with your friends and listening to the sound of raindrops falling on your Minecraft house. But as I gradually became habituated to the games, I started to spend most of my time on autopilot. I can't really remember most of the time I spent gaming. Eventually, I noticed that I didn't really want to play at all, but I kept going because I felt like I had to. After all, what else did I have to do? Sometimes the games would actively make me angry, and I would lash out. The purpose of a video game is to entertain. If it's not entertaining, then what's the point of playing it? And if you are truly searching for something that will make you feel alive again, is there any point in searching in a place that's already thoroughly explored, with long dead memories buried in the dirt? Why not search somewhere new? I'm going to make the argument that the adventures and responsibility offered by reality gives life meaning, which makes it infinitely more fun in the long term than anything a game has to offer. Dr. Frankl describes the search for meaning with these quotes. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. If architects want to strengthen a decrepit arch, they increase the load which is laid upon it, for thereby the parts are joined more firmly together. Okay, interesting quotes. But how am I supposed to go about finding the meaning of life? Honestly, I have no idea. There's no generalized, widely applicable meaning of life. In man's search for meaning, the meaning of life is compared to a game of chess. To ask in general terms about the meaning of life would be like asking a chess champion what they think would be the best move in the world. The answer? It depends. It depends on the state of the chessboard, like it depends on the state and circumstances of a person's life. I'm not sure if you can find the meaning of life, but you can find a meaning in your life. Dr. Frankl said, "Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems, and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. These tasks, and therefore the meaning of life, differ from man to man and from moment to moment. The meaning of life changes from person to person because it is self-assigned. So, instead of asking life what its meaning is, ask yourself what you want your own meaning to be. By choosing a challenge, a responsibility, a problem to solve, you can answer this question yourself. Whenever I'm trying to numb myself, there's always this small voice in the back of my head telling me that there is something I know I should be doing. Something which I tell myself over and over again to do, but I still end up ignoring. If you're bored out of your mind anyways, try piling more and more onto your plate, instead of always trying to clear it out. See how hard you can work, and discover your limits, because that border between your limits and the unknown is where you can find the adventure and the thrill of being alive. What if you don't want responsibility? Well, there are good reasons to avoid it. You start to rely on yourself. Other people begin to rely on you too, which forces you to take accountability. Making bad decisions will have detrimental consequences for those people, instead of just harming yourself. Taking on responsibility means giving up a portion of your freedom. Responsibility is suffering. However, suffering is unavoidable, so why not make the decision to willfully bear it? Let's say that you choose to avoid responsibility. The void of meaning will still be there. Are there other ways to fill it? Perhaps through a miracle or a stroke of luck? But is a life that is so dependent on chance and the whims of other people worth living? If you choose to relinquish responsibility for your life, then the immediate benefit is emotional freedom. Nothing bad that happens will be your fault. You cannot be blamed since you have given away your control. But is this true freedom? Who did you give your control to? Did they really have your best interests at heart? Or do they act for themselves? If you do accept responsibility, then you get a few things in return. Your actions will be magnified and reverberate throughout society through the people that you support. You can be paid for the value you provide. You get to witness your own incremental improvements, just like leveling up. But I think the best benefit is getting meaning in life. Being dependent upon will give you a reason to live. Here is another quote from Man's Search for Meaning. At the beginning of human history, man lost some of the basic animal instincts in which an animal's behavior is embedded and by which it is secured. In addition, however, man has suffered another loss in his more recent development, inasmuch as the traditions which buttressed his behavior are now rapidly diminishing. No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. The game of life offers you a call to adventure. We are not free from universal conditions and environmental influence. We are not free from suffering or hardship, but we are free to choose our attitudes, and we are free to bear our burdens willingly. Man is ultimately self-determining. In the concentration camps, for example, in this living laboratory and on this testing ground, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behave like swine, while others behaved like saints. Man has both potentialities within himself. Which one is actualized depends on decisions, but not on conditions. I'm head out. See you around.